I have here our document, which is called the Declaration of our 7th District, Gisbegawagi Sovereignty. Basically, this document will serve as our notice and our position as the original peoples of Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoq Nation. This will serve as our notice to Canada, NAFN, and the provinces in regards to their negotiations in land claims and self-government, and also the framework agreement regarding the implementation of the indigenous rights process that's going on between AFN and the Government of Canada. That is seen by Canada as a nation-to-nation relationship and the negotiations, and we want to clarify the record. This declaration will clarify the historical and legal records of who the real nations are, Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoqiyik. So I begin to read the declaration. Declaration of our 7th District, Gisbegawagi Sovereignty. Mi'kmaq, the land of the 7 districts, is where the Mi'kmaq people were born on, which it became, and for which it continues to exist even to this day. Mi'kmaq people for centuries ensured for themselves an everlasting union between its people, its lands, and its traditions. We, the Mi'kmaq of our original 7th District Overseers Tribal Council governing system, wish to maintain and preserve the welfare and liberty of all our people, and pledge our loyalty and support for each other, and implore the guidance of the Creator as we reunite our original government, the people of our district, for our common good. Whereas we, the Mi'kmaq peoples, and our original ancestral Overseers Tribal Council government wishes to affirm to the Government of Canada and the provinces of Quebec and New Brunswick of our creator and inherent rights in the land of our ancestors, by virtue of our historical, legal, original, and treaty rights, to exercise our rights of self-determination, political independence, and sovereignty over our traditional district territory. This declaration is not intended to dissolve a mutual historical nation relationship which has long existed between our 7 independent sovereign districts and England, established when the peace and friendship treaties were negotiated and signed by our ancestral district chiefs in 1752, 1760, 61, 1776, and 1779, and leading up to the current relationship with Canada. Rather, this declaration is meant to reaffirm and redefine our future relationship with Canada on a nation-to-nation basis. This historical nation-to-nation relationship, established during the signing of our peace and friendship treaties in the 1700s by our ancestral 7 district chiefs, were further recognized and ratified when on April 17, 1982, Queen Elizabeth and Prime Minister Elliott Trudeau signed Canada's proclamation of the Constitutional Act. Section 35(1), the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. That Section 25 of the Canada Constitution states, the guarantee in this charter of certain rights and freedoms shall not be construed to abrogate or derogate from any Aboriginal, treaty or other rights or freedoms that pertains to the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, including any rights or freedoms that have been recognized by the Royal Proclamation of October 7, 1763. That the Mi'kmaq Nation and its 7 independent sovereign districts have always been independent, but an integral part of North America. The Mi'kmaq Nation and its 7 independent sovereign districts nation status have been affirmed by the signing of the Peace and Friendship Treaties in Canada and by the signing of the Water Treaty of Alliance on July 19, 1776 with the United States of America. In both historic treaty making and signing events, the British Crown and the newly formed independent United States of America and our ancestral district chiefs signed these international treaties as sovereign nations. Further support that our Mi'kmaq sovereign nation status was not lost after the conclusion of the signing of our peace and friendship treaties in 1752, 1760-61, and 1779, and the signing of the Watertown Treaty of Alliance of 1776 was affirmed by the UN Studies in Treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements between states and indigenous populations in the final report by the UN Special Rapporteur Miguel Alfonso Martinez on June 22, 1999. That the UN Rapporteur's statement in his final report, which states, "History is an excellent source of knowledge for shaping political action. To ignore history would make it incredibly difficult to understand fully the present, and practically impossible to face the future wisely," was both prophetic and true. Further, in the UN Special Rapporteur's final report on page 42, paragraph 265, he states, "In the case of indigenous peoples who concluded treaties or other legal instruments with the European settlers or their continuators in the colonization process, the Special Rapporteur has not found any sound legal argument to sustain the argument that they have lost their international juridical status as nation peoples." Further, the UN Special Rapporteur states on page 18, paragraph 110, "In establishing formal legal relationships with peoples overseas, the European parties were clearly aware that they were negotiating and entering into contractual relationship with sovereign nations, with all the legal implications of that term during the period under consideration. The concept of the rule of law began to traverse a long path today in a new phase towards the transformation into the law of rulers, whereby this declaration of sovereignty is not seeking Canada's permission in the exercise of our ancient ancestral Mi'kmaq sovereignty upon our still unceded Mi'kmaq Southern District. This declaration of sovereignty serves as a notice to Canada to honor our Mi'kmaq nation status, established in the 1700s with the British Crown and the United States of America, through a treaty-making process between our two nations and further affirmed by the Royal Proclamation of 1763. That Canada stop its so-called nation-to-nation Indigenous rights framework negotiations with the Assembly of First Nations and its Indian Act band chiefs that threatened to erode our nation status established during our treaty-making process in the 1700s. That the Canada-FN Indigenous Rights Framework Agreement is designed to suppress Indigenous self-determination within Canadian Confederation, and as articulated by Canada, supports a very narrow vision of Indigenous original jurisdiction over lands, resources, and self-determination, which is confirmed by Canada's view that Indigenous nations will be the fourth order of government in Canada, below the third order of governments, which are municipalities. That this conflict of interest relationship between Canada, the FN, and their federally legislated band chiefs cannot legitimize their recognition and implementation of Indigenous Rights Framework Agreement. It has to be legitimized by all Indigenous rights holders in their original ancestral governing systems throughout Canada, which no consent was ever asked for by Canada or FN to enter into these discussions on self-government and land claim settlements, and would not meet the criteria required under the law of contracts. Canada must honor the historical nation-to-nation treaty relationship established in the 1700s by acknowledging that any land claims or self-government negotiations must be held with our Mi'kmaq Sovereign Seven Overseers Tribal Council and its people, who are the original collective title holders of our lands and treaty rights, with our position being that our original unceded lands are not for sale, and our peace and friendship treaties remain intact. Therefore, to establish a new renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Canada, it must be one that understands and recognizes our Mi'kmaq nation status established during the treaty-making process in the 1700s with the British Crown. A partnership that is based on recognition of our 7th District Gaspaguagui original title to our unceded lands and resources and our original and treaty rights. That in our inherent land, which we as the Mi'kmaq people have occupied since time immemorial, we are sending notice to Canada, provinces Quebec and New Brunswick, that our original 7th District governing body, known as the 7th District Overseers Tribal Council, is the original Mi'kmaq governing body of our Mi'kmaq peoples in Gaspagoagui. With our hearts and minds now renewed in this declaration of our 7th District sovereignty and these reflections, we most solemnly declare before our Creator, our ancestors, our people, and our future generations to come, that we are a free and sovereign peoples. Therefore, our 7th District Overseers Tribal Council recognizes and proclaims, in the presence and under the protection of all our relations and of the great Creator, the following rights of its peoples. Under Articles 1, that all Mi'kmaq women and men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain equal inherent collective rights, of which they enter into the Mi'kmaq nation they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their prosperity, namely, the enjoyment of life, liberty, and happiness. Number 2, that all powers are vested in and consequently derived from the Mi'kmaq peoples, and all Indian Act chiefs and councillors elected under the modern-day Indian Act system are but trustees and servants of the Mi'kmaq peoples, and always answerable to them when negotiating with Canada or the provinces with their original and treaty rights. Number 3, that the modern Indian Act was created by Canada and continues to be amended where its only interests have been to control, divide, and disseminate the original peoples of Turtle Island, and to erode and marginalize our original ancestral Mi'kmaq district governing systems. Number 4, that the original 7th District ancestral government of the Mi'kmaq peoples of Gaspagoagui at best can produce the greatest degree of happiness and safety to its people, and is most effectually secured against the danger of foreign administration interference into our affairs as Mi'kmaq peoples. That whenever government shall be found inadequate or contrary to these purposes, our people of our 7th District Gaspagoagui have been endowed by our Creator an irrefutable, inalienable, and inherent right to reform, alter, or abolish it. Number 5, the principle of all sovereignty resides essentially with the 7 independent sovereign districts and the Mi'kmaq people that it represents. Number 6, the Mi'kmaq people have a right to their original ancestral governments, and therefore that no government separate from or independent of the 7 independent sovereign districts ought to be erected, supported, or established without the consent of its people. Number 7, the appointing of members to serve as representatives in our 7th District Overseers Tribal Council were brought forth in a public assembly and were appointed by the several families of our territory, as was the custom of our ancestors in appointing their spokespersons in their time. Number 8, that Canada and AFN Indian Act chiefs did not ask for or receive our written or verbal consent to enter into Canada's and AFN's assimilation and surrender negotiations in their recognition and implementation of Indigenous Rights Framework Agreement and negotiations. We seek to eradicate our race, are deemed injurious to our people and our ancestral 7th District land title and treaty rights. Therein, any final agreements reached or signed between Canada and AFN and the Indian Act chiefs will have no binding effect upon our still sovereign 7th District Overseers Tribal Council and its members, families within our Gaspagoagui, and these agreements reached and signed by them will be considered null and void. Number 9, as a free and independent Mi'kmaq peoples, we are the holders of our individual and collective rights to our homelands, resources, and original and treaty rights. We have a right to require of every Indian Act Band Council official and their agents an account of all political and administrative actions when negotiating with our Creator-given rights with Canada and the provinces for the surrender of our district homelands, titles, and original and treaty rights. Number 10, no one shall be disquieted on account of his or her or his opinions, including religious, political, or matters of interest, provided their manifestation does not disturb the Mi'kmaq people's order. Number 11, whereby we, the Mi'kmaq peoples of Gespegawaga, declare to all nations and to all people, indigenous or non-indigenous, that we are united in our defense and support of our inherent ancestral, original, and treaty rights. As we come under one protection, we must strive for a common goal. These common interests, as set forth within the Declaration of our 7th District sovereignty, will once again renew our faith, restore our sacred trust, and re-establish our sacred alliance between ourselves as Mi'kmaq people, as it existed during the time of our ancestors. And then finally, we therefore, the representatives of our 7 districts overseers tribal council assembled, do in the name and by the authority of our Mi'kmaq peoples of our 7th district, Gespegawaga, do solemnly publish and declare that our sovereign 7th district is of right ought to be free and independent, and as a free and independent district, have full power to defend our homelands, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, create our membership laws, and do all other acts and things which independent districts have done before the arrival of the newcomers. Treaties concluded and signed by our 7 sovereign district chiefs within the British Crown, with the British Crown in 1752, 1760 and 61, and 1779, and the United States of America in the 1776 Watertown Treaty of Alliance, signed by our ancestral 7th district chief, Sabadius Nidapkovic, July 19, 1776, with the newly formed United States of America, all support our declaration of our nation status and our inherent and creator-given powers to do all of these things that nations are empowered to do. And we mutually pledge to each other in our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed on this 26th day of January 2019 by myself as the District Chief of the 7th District, Gespegawaga, and by the sub-chiefs under me, and also supported and signed by the different communities within the 7th District, Escanwobditch, Listowitch, their families, and also further supported by the communities of Millbrook, Shubi, and Elsipogto. Valadio.
Well, Logan.
No. There.